Okay, perfect. So we are live now on the platform, on our networking platform, swapcard.com, and on YouTube. So we still have one panelist not joining. So we have Tony, but we cannot hear you. So I think something with microphone. Anyway, I think we can start, and yeah, if others will join, so we'll just let them in. So I'm introducing our next panel of our Innovation Day APEC, and amazing panelists. So James Zhang from Black Panther Capital, so who will moderate this panel. Michael Sung from Fudan FinTech Research Center, and Ali from Blockchain Founders Fund. So the topic of this panel is how the technology will help to reshape the global economy. And I'm giving the word to James. So James, please hold the session. James, can you hear me?
Hey, can you hear me? Sorry, I think it might have cut off.
Okay. I was just introducing the topic of session. So yeah, and I'm giving the word to you. So please start.
Awesome. Yeah, appreciate it. Hi everyone. Thanks for being on the panel today. So the topic of discussion, I'm sure was already discussed, is rethinking the global paradigm, how technology will reshape the global economy. I think this panel is especially interesting today with what's going on with the world, with COVID, et cetera, impacting multiple different sectors. So maybe we can have a little short intro. Each speaker can give a short intro, 30 seconds to a minute on themselves and on their firm. So personally, I'm co-founder of Black Panther Capital. We're a multifamily office based out of Beijing, China, that is along the TMT sector in China. So we invest in mostly tech and blockchain. So I hand it over to Ali.
Sure. So Ali Madhavji here, managing partner at Blockchain Founders Fund. We invest in and help venture build early stage tech companies from blockchain, as well as lead ScaleX Ventures. We've got a number of non-blockchain early stage companies as well. We also consult the United Nations, INSEAD, as well as a number of other organizations on blockchain and emerging tech.
Awesome. Michael.
Yep. So yes, I'm Michael Sung. I run the Fudan Shanghai FinTech Research Center. We do a lot of work on, marrying sort of the traditional finance with fintech and digital assetization, digital finance, that kind of thing. I also sit as a founding faculty member of the China Institute of Economics and Finance, where we give policy recommendations on best practices for finance innovation. And I'm also the chairman of Carbon Blue Innovations, which is a venture building company that scales fintech innovation to the developing world.
Awesome. Maybe we can riff off of that. Seeing as the panelists are all very well versed in fintech and blockchain technologies, I'd like to have the first question just be very open. So given today's changing world with COVID, how do you see COVID accelerating different digital trends in today's world? In terms of how has it impacted certain sectors? For example, SaaS and obviously e-commerce have grown decades within weeks in the US and I'm sure globally. And how do you see certain companies benefiting or not benefiting from COVID? Please, whomever wants to start.
Yeah, I can touch on that, right? So, when you look at, what's going on, there's sort of both this, pandemic sort of keeping a lot of people at home, sort of transforming sort of what's going on in people's daily lives, but you've also got simultaneously this sort of economic impact that sort of a lot of people are sort of out of work. They're sort of having to change their business habits, not only because of this pandemic, but because of sort of what's going on the sort of global sort of slowdown in some ways, right? Um, and so from our portfolio directly, right, I'll sort of comment on that. We've seen over this period, nearly every single one of our portfolio companies is substantially better off and accelerated through this period. And I think we're kind of lucky because we didn't end up sort of having any travel related companies, which obviously is a sector that got decimated. And then apart from that, we've got a lot of B2B related companies, so selling products to other businesses. And there's sort of been a divergence, I'd say, in sort of what happened there, right? You've got some of these that have sort of slowed down significantly, and we're sort of lucky that we didn't have much on that side. And you've got a lot of businesses, Fortune 500s, SMEs, et cetera, that have actually significantly accelerated and compressed their sales cycles and things like that. And so that's been very positive. And this is literally, we're talking about all sorts of sectors. So it could be fintech, ag tech, media entertainment, all sorts of different things. You've got certain consumer products that have skyrocketed and accelerated. Say, take gaming, right? A lot more of that sort of happening with how much time people are spending at home. And we've seen that directly, firsthand from our portfolio. And so you've got all of these different things at play. But in reality, we're sort of still looking at this as, what happens as, as sort of time goes out, say a few years, 5 years out, what are we seeing really in terms of transformation and shifts that stick versus things that start to go back. I think though that this has been a major accelerant and will probably permanently change the way many people interact in different parts of their lives, especially even when you start thinking about fintech solutions, digital solutions. All of this stuff is very much becoming more and more ingrained into the way that we operate on a daily basis.
I'll follow on with what Ali said, right? I mean, COVID has been a great catalyst for digitization. Since we digitized the world 20 years ago, it's been a one-way monotonic trend. And if you look at now the S&P 500 in terms of digital economy companies, it represents about 40% now post-COVID, and it's growing massively, right? And you see now, companies and industries that were largely offline needing to figure out their digital strategy. And when that digitization occurs, they're not going to go back to the old way of doing things. There's just so many benefits of doing that. Now, from the standpoint of fintech, I think there's a particularly amazing perfect storm opportunity that's happening, right? We have basically, the first internet revolution was the digitization of information, right? And once you made offline information free and you democratized it, there's a demonetization effect because now you make it up on analytics on data, and you offer free services, and you lower the bar for everyone to join the digital economy. And you've seen what that's happened from before and after, right? And now we have another phase of digital disruption. This time it's going to be the digitization of anything of value. Okay, through blockchain, through crypto and digital assetization and things like that. So that means offline real estate, works of fine art, gold bars, a person's future net worth, anything that actually has economic value can now be tied to a digital asset. And in the same way, can be made to be free to, or be able to be fungible to everywhere, and for all the digital stack on top, things like big data and AI to be applied. And so we have this sort of superstorm that's happening. One, on the technology side, AI technology is now broadly maturing and commoditizing big data, cloud computing on the tech stack. On the blockchain side and sort of the digital finance side, also a perfect storm. We got blockchain infrastructure now in generation 5 or 6 or whatever you like to think of it as, but essentially maturing into enterprise grade applications. And you have regulation coming in, places like Singapore and Switzerland leading the fray. But I would say also prominently China right behind with the digitization of the RMB and also wholesale digitization and regulation of digital assets coming forth. So all that's coming to a head post-COVID right now in 2020. Right, and then the final piece, of course, is the macro event that Ali had mentioned is also looking very precarious. We have, if you follow Ray Dalio, these sort of super cycle kind of thing with the long and short-term debt cycles kind of syncing up, and this digital disruption in fintech is going to come in to make a massive change. So I think overall, this is a setup for humanity to really be pushed into the next phase of digitization. And we all have a front row seat in that. Certainly from a fintech standpoint, being able to give basic capabilities, cross-border payments, trade finance, the ability to tokenize and to be able to get access to liquidity for whatever value that you're creating. These are massive, massive things. Before, you needed an investment bank, you needed IPO, you needed a lot of those type of resources. Now, anybody at the push of their button can be able to do that. So this is going to bring massive, massive financial inclusion to most of the world. And that's actually why I'm focusing on that. That is to lower the bar of these fintech tools to all the SMEs, which post-COVID are mightily struggling. Right, those offline businesses that can't join the digital economy can now do so and get access to those digital economy tools and to be able to prosper.
Yeah, completely agree. Off of what Michael said. I think the digital transformation is all about inclusion and lowering the bar. We recently invested in a company called Asana that did a direct listing, so it's obviously very different from an IPO. And they actually did it the same day as Palantir. So I think a lot of companies these days, are looking at SPACs, direct listings, and just completely different ways of going public in a way. And for SMEs, it's a complete different push that I think we've really grown decades within a few weeks. Off of that, I'd like to ask you guys what you think geographically. Has your thesis changed geographically based on COVID? If we take a 5 to 10 year look at things, based on, say, the US right now still has increasing rates of COVID cases. Obviously does not seem to have as good of containment as China, which me being in Shanghai here right now, things seem to have gone completely back to normal. There's 0 new cases. Have you guys sort of like looked at companies or your investment thesis differently for fintech and different geographies that will excel or deteriorate more within the next 5 to 10 years?
It's a really good question. So we've actually got companies across 5 continents, and so we are pretty focused sort of in different regions. And in reality, I mean, in large part, what we're sort of seeing and what we've sort of seen as well to a lot of extent is in most cases, there's going to be regional players that do quite well, right? So it's very rare that you end up with sort of major global players that dominate sort of an entire sector. And so that's also where, regardless of sort of what happens, I mean, you're going to end up still with, winners in each of these different, in each of these different sectors, essentially in those regions, right? I wouldn't really look at saying like, while a lot of people are talking about, China overtaking, say, the United States as an economic power, we're not really looking and saying like, okay, we think the US is sort of on the downhill from startup perspective. Like that's not really impacting in reality. We're still seeing some of the best talent in the world, of course, coming out of the United States, always a lot of great innovation. And similarly, you can find great innovation in these different regions. And because of how localized and how much understanding sort of the local culture and how important that is to a lot of these solutions to really, gain adoption, especially early adoption, and really start picking up. It's very critical, I think, to sort of look at, very localized solutions, which is typically what we do. And we want to see them sort of win in one country or one city and then like start scaling from there. And then they can start looking at the region sort of as a whole later on.
Okay. My perspective, I'll be a counterpoint to Ali. Certainly, of course, innovation is coming from all sectors and all geographies. And certainly the commoditization of digital economy tools like, as I mentioned, cloud and AI and all that kind of stuff means that anybody who has a great idea can now leverage that idea and get distribution for that idea in a global fashion, right? So we certainly will see unicorns pop out at increasing rates from all sectors and from all areas. That being said, I do think that one area to particularly watch would be China with respect to a lot of the things, at least related to fintech and digital commerce, right? China's already been established as a leader in digital e-commerce and payments, online payments. We're going to see a major trend also for China to lead blockchain adoption in terms of enterprise-grade blockchain adoption. One notable initiative that has popped up recently is called the Blockchain-Based Services Network, BSN, because of the China effect, right? Because it's the most high-profile national blockchain interoperability framework. It's in the 6 months that it's been released into the wild, it's been spread into over 100 cities across the country, and the government can say, hey, city governments and state-owned enterprise and eventually private companies, you should use this to interoperate. And because of that effect, there's massive adoption on the mainland anyway, right? But also, the plan is for the BSN to be a global interoperability network. And then you ask, okay, well, if China starts promoting this as the backbone of the digital Silk Road, and China is the largest trade partner for most of these countries on regionally around the world, certainly the developing countries, and they come in and say, well, we want to trade with you, but operability, it would be helpful if you are latched onto the system, then that will also drive, in my belief, global enterprise adoption. We're on the cusp of that anyway. COVID is going to accelerate that, but then if there is a global infrastructure that's being provided, I think that will be a major catalyst push. So I think that's one area. The other major area, as I think I mentioned before briefly, is that we're on the brink of really digitizing the world through digital assets and things like this, right? China looked beforehand as somewhat against sort of crypto, right? You see, banning of exchanges and finance getting kicked out, and even mining is being discontinued or at least not favored. But I think it belies the fact that China is actually planning on massively regulating the industry. Actually, what you see as things to suppress crypto, it's more like they're just cleaning shop. They're getting rid of the unregulated, sort of bad behavior, and in its place will be a regulated version. And when that happens, it's my strong belief, having a front row seat here, that China's going to flip a switch, and then it's going to open up its economy, which is arguably the largest in the world by PPP anyway, and massive adoption for regulated digital assets. And that will also drive that around the world. The same way that you saw that the digital RMB did, right? 2 years ago, we would not be talking about central bank digital currencies. And then I would say it wasn't even China, it was Facebook, Libra coming in and announcing, which caused China, who had been sort of quietly researching this since 2014, to get ahead of it and release in the wild. In the last year, I mean, it's gone from test beds in a few cities to massive testing, scale testing across most of the economic zones that matter in China, and they're gearing up for essentially a commercial release sometime next year before the Olympics. The PBOC has stated very strongly that that the policy is going to be in place to do that. In fact, so they're massively driving that. Now, that being said, okay, when China does that, it's not just going to be like China dominating. I think I've been on the lecture circuit talking about how whether or not the digital RMB is going to overtake the hegemony of the U.S. dollar. I think that's going to take a long time because opening of the capital accounts for RMB is a more nuanced decision beyond just the digitization of the currency. But what that does is, because of that China catalyst effect, now you got 80% of the world's central banks all investigating this, right? And if you fast forward, say 3 to 5 years, you will likely see dozens of CBDCs issued in the wild. And then these, the central bank currencies will want to talk to each other, right? So I think because of this catalyst moment, I think the world is going to move.
Awesome. I believe we have time for one last question. So I'd really like to direct this last few minutes of the panel to sort of on the blockchain side, since Ali and Michael both have such a focus on blockchain technology and cryptocurrency. So if we talk about a catalyst in the world today, that sort of one catalyst that will drive the economy and bring up cryptocurrencies, that is Bitcoin as a fiat gateway to other digital assets. So let's talk a little bit about how secretly, not secretly, but sort of incognitely, Square bought up $50 million worth of Bitcoin. Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy, publicly listed company since for over 2 decades, bought up around $500 million. And these are not, little trades that you go on Coinbase and rip off of a $500 million Bitcoin trade. These are carefully planned. As you said, Libra, Facebook's been researching it since 2014. Same as MicroStrategy, took over 6 months to do this OTC and without moving the market even over. I'm curious as to how these effects these public companies will have. Public CEOs of Jack Dorsey, other publicly listed companies, with the inflation rate today, as companies cannot hold cash anymore, and looking at other forms of hedges.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting point, right? And I'm also on the board of a public company focused on Bitcoin mining called CryptoStar. And so you look at sort of all of these public companies and what they're doing with, essentially having to hedge US dollars, but even, some investors are talking about the need to hedge gold, right? And you think about the finite resource in the world, and can you really say that gold is finite? And at what point can we be space mining, right? And I know this might sound a little crazy, but whether that's in your sort of thoughts of that's 50 years away or 100 years away, at some point we're going to get there. And when we get there, we're talking about $92 billion of gold per human on Earth, right? And so it's some pretty crazy numbers. And so you essentially, can probably say that at some point gold is not really finite in any measure, and is nearly infinite in fact, right? And so with gold, I think the stat with Bitcoin, I think the stat from publicly traded companies right now is it's close to 500,000 BTC being held, which we're talking about close to $6 billion, a little bit less than that, being held by publicly traded companies. So these numbers are starting to become quite significant. And I think you will start to see other companies, more and more companies, as you've seen with high net worths moving into the space, as you've seen with sort of hedge funds starting to move into the space more and more, you're going to see bigger companies say, hey, let's pull a small amount of this into Bitcoin as sort of a rainy day sort of fund in case, things really go wrong. I think Chamath Palihapitiya, talked about the chance of, say, the US dollar failure at 5% or even 10%. But even if you think it's 1% at some point in, say, the midterm, that's still a big risk, right? Because that was a risk that you would not have perceived maybe a decade ago. And so this is I think going to become a more significant thing over the next decade, but especially even over the next couple of years. I think it's going to significantly accelerate.
I would tend to agree completely, meaning Bitcoin, as the granddaddy of all crypto, has earned its right as digital gold. It's certainly the most secure blockchain, and now we have institutional buy-in from across pension funds to endowments to central banks to major financial institutions. So there isn't anything else on the market that has quite that kind of buy-in or characteristics. In general, as I mentioned, the world is digitizing, right? So there's going to be, as I mentioned before, a unilateral shift of the offline economy to the online. So we don't know. I think gold's going to be around for a while. I think space mining is interesting. It might be, quite a few decades out there before we really get to a place where that could, come in, have systemic effects on the economy. But that being said, I think the future, if you look in the long tail, has got to be digitized. It will be algorithmic, and Bitcoin is a nice proxy for what will happen in the future now. So I am quite positive and bullish on the long-term prospects of Bitcoin, and I think that it will be very, very interesting to see what happens in the next couple of years. The global macro, as I mentioned, doesn't look very good, right? With these different debt cycles and things like that. I personally believe we're in for a very rude awakening, the likes of which humanity hasn't seen. Certainly the volatility and the geopolitics and all those things that are happening right now lead to people who want to have a flight to safety. Right now, there's basically very few asset classes that can say that. Gold is one of them for now, and the other is Bitcoin. And Bitcoin has some systemic advantages of being a digital form of scarcity that people trust. And so I do believe that Bitcoin, short of it being compromised, right? If quantum computing comes down the line, which I think might come sooner than space mining, or it gets hacked, or there's collusion among all the miners and things like that undermine the trust. These are things that would have a large effect. But barring that, I do believe that Bitcoin's strongly positioned to be a store of value that everybody will fly to.
Awesome. I believe that's all the time we have on the panel today. I like to just leave maybe whatever viewers are viewing this panel with. Everyone here believes that Bitcoin is the future, and that everyone should buy more of it. And that's how technology reshaped the global economy.
That's a
good way to end, James. Yes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, James. Thank you, Ali. And it was a great discussion. So have a nice day, or whatever the data time it is in your location.
Likewise.
Thank you for joining.
Hey, James, I'll reach out to you in Shanghai. We should grab a drink.
Yeah. Most definitely.